The air at the cemetery was thick and heavy, smelling of fresh rain and old flowers. I stood by the open grave, my heart feeling like a lead weight in my chest. My dad was gone. He was the only person who truly understood me, and now he was being lowered into the ground. Through my blurry, tear-filled eyes, I saw my mum standing a few feet away. She looked pale and fragile, clinging tightly to my younger brother, Daniel. I needed her comfort, and I thought she needed mine. I took a shaky step forward, my hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. I just wanted to hold her and cry together. But as I got close, something terrifying happened. My mum didn't reach back. Instead, she recoiled as if I were a monster. She pulled away so sharply that I almost stumbled. Her eyes, usually so warm, were suddenly as cold as ice. She looked right through me, her face twisting into a mask of pure disgust. The silence of the funeral was shattered when she spoke. Her voice didn't shake. It was sharp and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't know her," she said, her lip curling. "Who is this person?"
"I don't know who she is."
The world seemed to stop spinning. I looked around at the sea of mourners, seeing their shocked expressions. People I had known my entire life were suddenly whispering behind their hands. My chest caved in, making it hard to breathe. I was his daughter, Nora. I had grown up in their house, eaten at their table, and loved them with everything I had. How could she say she didn't know me? I looked at Daniel, hoping he would speak up, but he just stared at the grass, his knuckles white as he gripped Mum's arm. I stood there, completely humiliated, feeling like a ghost while my own mother treated me like a stranger at my father's burial. I wanted to scream, to show them photos, to prove my existence, but the coldness in the air was too strong. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When the service ended, Mum turned her back on me and walked away with Daniel, surrounded by a circle of relatives who acted like I was invisible. I stood alone by the grave, wondering how a mother could ever erase her own child. What could have happened to make her heart turn into stone so quickly? The drive back to my childhood home was a blur of tears and confusion. I just wanted to go to my room, lay on my bed, and try to understand what was happening. But when I pulled into the driveway, my heart stopped. There, piled on the curb in cheap black trash bags, were my things. My clothes, my old school yearbooks, and even the stuffed bear Dad gave me were sitting out in the open like garbage. I ran to the front door and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled out my key and tried to shove it into the lock, but it wouldn't fit. The locks had been changed. I pounded on the wood until my fists hurt, shouting for Mum to open up. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was watering her plants next door. When our eyes met, she immediately looked away, pulling her garden hose back and scurrying inside. It felt like the whole world was in on a secret I didn't know. I pulled out my phone and called Mum, my hands shaking. It rang 3 times before the screen went dark. She had declined the call. Someone wanted me out of my own life, and they were moving faster than I could think. I sat on the porch steps, surrounded by the trash bags containing my life. I felt small and powerless. I needed professional help, so I decided to contact Mr. Henderson, my dad's longtime lawyer. He had handled all of Dad's business for years and knew me since I was a baby. I called his office, expecting him to clear everything up and tell me it was just a big mistake. But when the assistant put me through, his voice sounded strained and formal. "I'm sorry, Nora," he said, sounding like he was reading from a script. "I've reviewed the documents, but there is no record of you in your father's will. All assets are to be split between your mother and your brother, Daniel." I gripped the phone so hard I thought it would crack. That was impossible. Dad and I were incredibly close. He used to tell me that I was the one who would carry on his legacy because I had his business mind. He would never, ever erase me or leave me with nothing. Something was terribly wrong. Either the will had been changed while he was sick, or something even worse was happening behind the scenes. I felt like a net was closing around me, pulling me away from the truth. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, unable to sleep. My mind kept looping back to the last week of Dad's life. I went through my phone and found a voicemail I had missed. I had been so busy with a work project that I hadn't returned his call. I pressed play, my heart racing.
Dad's
Voice filled the room, but it wasn't his usual cheerful tone. He sounded urgent, his breathing heavy and shallow. "Nora, listen to me," he whispered, and I could hear background noise like a door closing. "I don't have much time. If anything happens to me, you have to be careful.
You
I can't trust." The message suddenly cut off into static. I replayed it 10 times, 20 times, trying to hear the name he was about to say. Don't trust who? Was he talking about the doctors? The lawyers? Or someone even closer? The fear in his voice was something I had never heard
before.
He wasn't just sick, he was scared. He was trying to warn me about a danger that was already inside our circle. I realized then that my father hadn't just died, he had been silenced. And now the people who silenced him were coming for me next. I couldn't stay away any longer. I needed answers, and I knew Daniel was the only one who might give them to me. I waited until I saw Mom leave the house in a taxi, then I walked up and knocked on the back door. Daniel opened it, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red, and he looked smaller than usual. "Daniel, please," I begged. "Tell me what's going on."
Why?
"Did Mom do that at the funeral? Why are my things on the curb?" Daniel wouldn't even look me
In the eye.
He stared at his feet, his shoulders shaking. "You shouldn't have come back, Nora," he whispered, repeating the exact words Mom had used earlier. "Just go away. It's safer if you just go." I grabbed his arm, trying to get him to look at me. "Daniel, we are family. Dad loved us. You know she's lying." He pulled his arm away and stepped back into the shadows of the
hallway.
"I can't talk to you," he said, his voice cracking with fear. "She's watching."
He's
watching. Before I could ask who he was, Daniel slammed the door and locked it. My own brother was terrified of me, or terrified of what would happen if he talked to me. Driven by a gut feeling, I went to the hospital where Dad had spent his final days. I hoped to find someone who had seen what happened in those last hours. I wandered the halls until I found the nurse who had been on his floor, a kind-looking woman named Maria. When I introduced myself as Nora, she looked around nervously, making sure no one was listening. "I remember you from the photos your father kept by his bed," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"But
when the paperwork came through, your mother gave very strict orders. She told the staff that you were not to be listed as next of kin. She said you were a troubled stranger who had been bothering the family." My stomach dropped as if I were on a falling elevator. My mom had been planning this before Dad was even dead. She was already erasing my name from the legal records while I was sitting by his bed, thinking we were grieving together. She had turned the hospital staff against me, making sure I would have no legal right to his medical information or
his body.
The betrayal felt like a physical blow. My mother wasn't just grieving. She was cold, calculating, and working on a timeline I didn't understand. I decided to watch the house from a distance, parked in a rented car down the street. A few hours later, a sleek, black luxury car pulled into the driveway. It was the kind of car that screamed wealth and power. A man in a sharp, expensive suit stepped out. He looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair and a confident walk. He walked up to the front door, as if he owned the place. When the door opened, my mom didn't just greet him. She leaned in and he kissed her on the cheek. They stood there for a moment, talking and smiling, looking like a couple who had been together for years. My blood turned to ice. My dad had only been in the ground for a
day.
Who was this man, and why was he acting so comfortable in my father's house? Why was my mom, who was supposedly so heartbroken, acting so friendly with a stranger? I felt a surge of anger. This man was replacing my father before the funeral flowers had even wilted. I realized then that Daniel was afraid of was likely this man in the suit. He was the reason I was being erased. I knew I had to get inside that house. I waited until the luxury car left and saw Mom and Daniel get into another car to head out. I still had the spare key Dad had hidden under a loose stone in the garden years ago. My heart was thumping against my ribs as I slipped inside the back door. The house felt cold and empty, stripped of the warmth Dad used to bring. I went straight to his study, but it was almost entirely cleared out. The bookshelves were empty, and his desk was
bare.
It looked like someone was trying to wipe away his memory. I began searching every corner, checking for anything they might have missed. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a slight misalignment in the bottom drawer of his desk. I pulled it all the way out and found a hidden compartment. Inside was a folder filled with copies of financial records and legal papers. As I flipped through them, my breath caught. My name was everywhere. I was listed on bank accounts, property deeds, and investment portfolios. So, why was I erased publicly? If these documents were real, I was actually very wealthy and I had legal rights to almost everything my dad owned. As I dug deeper into the hidden documents, I found a set of incorporation papers for a company called Titan Logistics. I had always known Dad ran a successful business, but I didn't realize how big it was. These papers revealed that Titan Logistics was worth tens of millions of dollars. But the most shocking part was the ownership structure. According to the original founding documents, my dad owned 50% and Nora Sullivan, owned the other 50%. I was a co-owner of a massive company. I sat on the floor of the empty study, my head spinning. If I owned half the company, then my mom and Daniel couldn't just kick me out. They were trying to take my share by pretending I didn't exist. If I wasn't his daughter, I couldn't claim my ownership. It was a brilliant, cruel plan. They weren't just erasing me because they hated me. They were erasing me to steal my birthright. I looked at the signatures on the bottom of the page. Dad's handwriting was firm and clear next to mine. This was the news everyone needed to hear. But I had to figure out who was pulling the strings behind the curtain. I took the documents to a small, independent lawyer in the next town over, someone who didn't know Victor Hale or my family. I told her the whole story, and she spent an hour looking over the papers I found. When she looked up, her face was grim. "These documents you found are the originals, Nora," she said. "But I checked the public business registry this morning. There are newer documents on file. They show that you transferred all your shares to a man named Victor Hale 6 months ago." My jaw dropped. I never did that. I've never even met a Victor Hale until I saw him at the house. She pulled up a digital copy of the transfer agreement on her computer screen. There, at the bottom, was a signature that looked exactly like mine. It was a perfect match. But I knew I hadn't signed it. Someone had forged my identity to steal my half of the company. The betrayal went deeper than I ever imagined. They didn't just want me gone, they had used my name to rob me while Dad was still alive. Victor Hale wasn't just a guest. He was a thief who had used my own mother to help him take everything. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I waited for my mom at the house, sitting on the porch as the sun began to set. When she pulled up and saw me, her face didn't soften. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. "I told you to stay away," she said, her voice like a whip. "You're making a scene, and it's embarrassing." I stood up, holding the copies of the hidden records. "I know about Victor Hale, Mum. I know about the forged signatures and the company. How could you do this? How could you help him steal from Dad and me?" She stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing. For a second, I saw a flash of fear, but it was quickly replaced by that same icy wall. "You don't understand how the world works, Nora," she said, stepping closer until we were face to face. "Your father made mistakes. Victor is a powerful man who can protect this family. You Should have stayed gone. If you keep poking around, you're going to lose much more than just a
house.
She wasn't just ignoring me. She was protecting a lie that she had helped build. She had chosen a stranger and a business deal over her own daughter. The next day, I went back to the hospital. I found Maria, the nurse, during her lunch break. I told her about the argument I suspected my dad had with Victor. She looked around, then leaned in.
Close.
I wasn't supposed to say anything, she whispered. But the night your father passed, I heard shouting from his room. It was late, and visitors were supposed to be gone.
I saw that
man, the one in the suit, leaving the room. He looked furious. Your father's heart rate was spiking on the monitor. I went in to check on him, and he was trying to say something, but he was too weak. He was pointing at his briefcase, but it was gone. Victor had taken it. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant hand. My dad didn't die peacefully in his sleep. He died after a confrontation with the man who is currently stealing his life's work. My dad knew something was wrong, and he was trying to fight back even in his final hours. Victor hadn't just waited for him to die. He had pressured him until his heart couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't just fraud. It was something much darker. I remembered Dad once told me that if I ever needed a rainy day fund, I should look at the old account he set up when I was born. I had forgotten about it for years, but I managed to find the login details in the hidden folder. When I finally got into the account online, my eyes nearly popped out of my head. The balance was huge, millions of dollars. I checked the transaction history and saw that Dad had been moving large sums of money into this account for the last 3 weeks of his life. He was stripping his other accounts and putting the money into the secret one that only I could access. He knew Victor and Mum were coming for the business, and he was preparing me for the fight. He was making sure that even if they stole the company, I would have the resources to take it back. He had been a step ahead of them the whole time, protecting me from the grave. I sat in my motel room, crying not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. My dad hadn't forgotten me. He had loved me enough to plan for my survival while he was dying. I knew I needed Daniel on my side. I caught him walking home from school and pulled the car over. Daniel, look at this, I said, showing him the video of the hospital records and the secret bank account on my phone. Victor pressured Dad. He forged my name. Mum is helping him because she's scared. Is that what you want? To live in fear of that man? Daniel started to cry, his backpack slipping off his shoulder. Mum told me we would lose everything if I didn't play along, he sobbed. Victor told her he would put us on the street. He said he had papers that showed Dad was a criminal, but I didn't believe him. He threatened us, Nora. He said if I talked to you, something bad would happen to Mum. The truth finally came out. This was bigger than a family argument. It was a total takeover based on fear. Victor had manipulated my mum's grief and turned it into a weapon against me. He had threatened to destroy what was left of our family to make sure he kept the millions he stole. Daniel was just a kid caught in the middle of a monster's plan. I went back to the motel and opened Dad's old laptop, which I had managed to grab from the trash bags. I searched through every folder, looking for anything hidden. Deep in the system files, I found a video file labeled, "If they try to erase you." My hands trembled so hard I could barely click the mouse. I pressed play, and Dad's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study, looking tired but determined. "Nora," he said, his voice steady. "If you're watching this, it means Victor has made his move. He thinks he can manipulate your mother and squeeze you out. He doesn't know I recorded our meetings. He doesn't know I have proof of his embezzlement and the threats he made against our family." I watched as Dad held up documents to the camera, explaining how Victor had been stealing from the company for years. Dad had seen this coming for a long time. He had documented everything, creating a digital trail that Victor couldn't delete. The video was the ultimate weapon. It was Dad speaking from the grave to protect his daughter and his legacy. I knew then that I had everything I needed to win. The video went on for 20 minutes. Dad showed proof that every signature Victor claimed was mine was actually a forgery. He even had a recording of Victor saying that he would erase Nora so she wouldn't interfere with the merger. It was a complete confession of Victor's plan. "Nora," Dad said at the end of the video, his eyes looking directly into the camera. "You are the rightful owner. Don't let them tell you otherwise. You have the heart of a lion, and I know you will do what's right. I love you." I felt a surge of strength I had never felt before. The fear that had been haunting me since the funeral vanished. I wasn't just a daughter looking for a hug anymore. I was a co-owner of a multi-million-dollar empire, and I had the proof to destroy the man who tried to steal it. I stayed up all night making copies of the video and the documents. I sent them to a team of high-powered lawyers and the police. Tomorrow was the annual board meeting for Titan Logistics, and I was going to give them the news everyone needed to hear. The next morning, I arrived at the Titan Logistics headquarters. It was a massive glass building that stood as a symbol of Dad's hard work. I walked through the lobby, and the security guard tried to stop me. "I'm Nora Sullivan, co-founder of this company," I said, my voice cold and firm. "And I am going to that board meeting." I walked past him before he could react and took the elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, I saw the boardroom. Victor Hale was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by executives in expensive suits. My mom was sitting to his right, looking uncomfortable in a black dress. The room went silent as I walked in. Every head turned toward me. Victor leaned back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. "This is a private meeting for stockholders," he said smoothly. "I believe you've been told you don't belong here, young lady." The executives looked at me with confusion and doubt. They had been told I was a troubled stranger. But I didn't blink. I walked right up to the empty chair at the other end of the table and sat down. "I'm not a stranger," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "I am Nora Sullivan. I own 50% of Titan Logistics, and I have the original founding documents to prove it." I pulled out the papers and slid them across the table. Victor laughed, a cold, dry sound. "We've already seen those, Nora. But we also have the signed transfer papers where you gave your shares to me. Those are the ones that matter." He looked at the board members, nodding confidently. But then I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward the group. "Actually," I said, "I have something better. I have a video of my father explaining exactly how you forged those signatures and how you threatened my family to keep them quiet." I pressed play. Dad's voice filled the boardroom, and as he began to detail Victor's crimes, the room went deathly quiet. I watched Victor's face. His smug smile didn't just fade, it cracked and crumbled. He turned a sickly shade of gray as he heard Dad's voice accusing him of theft and fraud. The board members began to murmur, their eyes shifting from the screen to Victor with growing horror. As the video played the recording of Victor threatening Mom and Daniel, my mother suddenly broke. She let out a loud, jagged sob and buried her face in her hands. "He made me do it," she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "He told me he would destroy us. He said Nora didn't care about us and that he was the only one who could save the company." She looked at me, her face wet with tears and smeared with makeup. "I'm so sorry, Nora. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do." The board members looked at her with pity and disgust. She had chosen survival over her own child, but seeing her break down made me realize how much Victor had truly broken her spirit. She had been a victim of his manipulation just as much as I was a victim of her erasure. Victor tried to stand up, his face twisted in a snarl. "This is a lie. This video is a deepfake," he shouted. But no one was listening to him anymore. The evidence was too clear, and my mother's confession was the final nail in his coffin. The doors to the boardroom opened again, but this time it wasn't an uninvited guest. It was the police. I had sent them the evidence hours ago, and they had seen enough. "Victor Hale, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement," the lead officer said. Victor tried to run toward the side exit, but two officers blocked his path. They grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back, clicking the handcuffs into place. The executives watched in silence as the man who had been their leader was led out of the room in shame. The empire he had worked so hard to steal was collapsing in a matter of minutes. As he passed me, he spat on the floor, but I didn't even flinch. I just looked at him with calm eyes. He had lost everything, and I had gained my life back. The board members immediately began talking, realizing that the company's future was now in my hands. The atmosphere in the room shifted from tension to a strange kind of relief. The truth was finally out, and the shadow that had been hanging over the company was gone. A week later, a formal hearing was held to restore my legal status. In the very same courtroom where my mother had once signed papers to erase me, my identity was publicly restored. The judge looked at the evidence and ruled that the transfer of shares was completely void. I was officially recognized as the co-owner and rightful heir to my father's estate. People who had whispered about me at the funeral now came up to me with embarrassed smiles, trying to apologize for doubting me. I ignored most of them. Their opinions didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the look on my mom's face as she sat in the front row. She wasn't cold or icy anymore. She just looked broken. She had been publicly exposed as a woman who had betrayed her daughter, and the weight of that shame was visible in every line on her face. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for a connection, but I wasn't ready to give it. My identity was back, but the mother I thought I had was gone forever. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, Daniel walking right beside me. Mum followed us out to the parking lot, her voice trembling as she called my name. "Nora, please stop. I need to talk to you." I turned around, seeing her looking older than she ever had before. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her hands shaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing for the family. I was so lost after your father died, and Victor was so strong. Please, can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt a deep, profound sadness. "You pretended I didn't exist, Mum," I said softly. "You threw my life in trash bags and changed the locks. You let a stranger kiss you in the house where Dad lived. Some things can't be fixed with an apology." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, mirroring the way she had recoiled at the funeral. The pain ran too deep for a simple, "I'm sorry," to heal. I knew that trust was like a mirror. Once it was shattered, you could glue the pieces back together, but the cracks would always be there. I wasn't sure if we would ever be a family again. I officially took control of Titan Logistics the following Monday. The transition was smooth because I knew the business inside and out, just like Dad said I would. Many people expected me to go on a revenge tour, firing everyone who had sided with Victor, or suing my mother for her part in the fraud. But I refused to do that. I wasn't going to let Victor's poison change who I was. Instead, I focused on stabilizing the company and ensuring Daniel's future was secure. I set up a trust fund for him that no one could touch, ensuring he would never be used as a pawn again. As for my mum, I set boundaries. I provided her with enough money to live comfortably, but I made it clear that she was no longer part of my daily life or the company. I moved back into our childhood home, but I changed the locks myself and cleared out everything that reminded me of Victor. I was the one in power now, but I chose to use that power for stability and integrity, not for more hurt. I was my father's daughter, after all. A few months later, I held a press conference in front of the Titan Logistics building. There were hundreds of reporters and cameras, all waiting to hear from the ghost founder who had returned from the dead. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. I didn't feel nervous. I felt at peace. I told the truth about Victor, about the forgery, and about my father's incredible foresight. I spoke about the legacy of integrity that Dad had built and how I planned to honor it. At the very end, I looked directly into the main camera and said calmly, "I was never missing. I was never a stranger. I was just silent until the truth needed a voice. And now that voice is here to stay." Across the room, I saw my mum standing in the back. She wasn't hiding or crying. She was just watching me with a look of pure realization. She finally saw me for who I truly was, not a daughter to be erased, but a force to be reckoned with. I stepped away from the mic, the sound of camera shutters filling the air, knowing that my father would be proud. The truth had finally won.